Hi, I'm Rashonda Kate. This is Reading with Rashonda, and we are reading The House Behind the Cedars by Charles Chesnutt. I don't remember a thing that happens in this book. I know I have read it, and I remember enjoying it. I've got tons of notes in here, so it clearly made me think about a lot of things. I don't remember at all what it's about or what happens, though, so it'll be like it's new for both of us. I'm going to read the biography of Charles Chesnutt, and then we'll dive in. Charles Waddell Chesnutt, 1858 to 1932, was born in Cleveland, Ohio, where his family had moved from Fayetteville, North Carolina, to seek better economic opportunities. Shortly after the Civil War, they returned to Fayetteville, where Chesnutt spent most of his childhood and young adulthood. He taught in local public schools, eventually returning to Cleveland and being admitted to the bar. He established a legal stenography business, yet found himself strongly attracted to writing fiction. He published two collections of short stories, The Conjure Woman and The Wife of His Youth and Other Stories of the Color Line in 1899. And I really wanted to read The Wife of His Youth to you, but I can't find it. It's in my house somewhere. I don't know where. And three novels, none of which was more than moderately successful. The House Behind the Cedars in 1900, which is the one we're about to read, The Marrow of Tradition in 1901, and The Colonel's Dream in 1905. Unable to support his family through writing, he returned to the profession of legal stenography. And I want to add, he actually wrote other books. My favorite book of his is Paul Marchand, FMC. And he tried to publish that in 1921, but none of the publishing houses would take it. So it wasn't published until 1999. So I can't read it because it's under copyright, but I love that book. That book's really, really good. But what we're reading today is The House Behind the Cedars, published in 1900. It's got a bunch of chapters. It has 33 chapters, but the chapters are not particularly long, so we should be able to do one chapter per reading. I'm skipping over the introduction and suggestions for further reading, and here we go. Chapter 1, A Stranger from South Carolina. Time touches all things with destroying hand, and if he seem now and then to bestow the bloom of youth, the sap of spring, it is but a brief mockery, to be surely and swiftly followed by the wrinkles of old age, the dry leaves and bare branches of winter. And yet there are places where time seems to linger lovingly long after youth has departed, and to which he seems loath to bring the evil day. Who has not known some even-tempered old man or woman who seemed to have drunk of the fountain of youth, who has not seen somewhere an old town that, having long since ceased to grow, yet held its own without perceptible decline? Some such trite reflection, as opposite to the subject as most random reflections are, passed through the mind of a young man who came out of the front door of the Patesville Hotel about 9 o'clock one fine spring morning, a few years after the Civil War, and started down Front Street toward the market house. Arriving at the town late the previous evening, he had been driven up from the steamboat in a carriage, from which he had been able to distinguish only the shadowy outlines of the houses along the street, so that this morning walk was his first opportunity to see the town by daylight. So he got there in the middle of the night, and this is a young man, and this is the first time he got to see the town by day. He was dressed in a suit of linen duck, the day was warm, a Panama straw hat. Do you know the song, he wears tan shoes with pink shoelaces, a polka dot vest, and man, oh man, he wears tan shoes with pink shoelaces and a big Panama with a purple hat band. Anyway, made me think of that. Sorry, I'll keep going. He was dressed in a suit of linen duck, the day was warm, a Panama straw hat, and patent leather shoes. In appearance, he was tall, dark, with straight, black, lustrous hair, and very clean-cut, high-bred features. When he paused, okay, so we're going to read that again, because as I told you, in 19th century literature, and while this is technically the 20th century, because it was published in 1900, it was written about the 19th century, and most scholars consider the 19th century a long century, in that the mores and attitudes of the 19th century that we find in literature began before the 19th century began and extended until after the 19th century was over. So a lot of people, when they talk about the 19th century, they're kind of talking about anything that really happened from about the founding of the US, which is at 1776, all the way until about 1920 when the US entered World War I. So we are well situated within the 19th century here, and we've talked before, one must always pay attention to color cues when reading 19th century novels. So let's read that again. In appearance, he was tall, dark, with straight black lustrous hair and very clean-cut high-bred features. When he paused by the clerk's desk on his way out to light his cigar, the day clerk, who had just come on duty, glanced at the register and read the last entry. John Warwick, Clarence, South Carolina. One of the South Carolina big bugs, I reckon, probably in cotton or turpentine. The gentleman from South Carolina walking down the street glanced about him with an eager look in which curiosity and affection were mingled with a touch of bitterness. He saw little that was not familiar or that he had not seen in his dreams 100 times during the past 10 years. There had been some changes, it is true, some melancholy changes, but scarcely anything by way of addition or improvement to counterbalance them. Here and there, blackened and dismantled walls marked the place where handsome buildings once had stood, for Sherman's march to the sea had left its mark upon the town. The stores were mostly of brick, 2 stories high, joining one another after the manner of cities. Some of the names on the signs were familiar. Others, including a number of Jewish names, were quite unknown to him. A 2 minutes walk brought Warwick, the name he had registered under, but perhaps not his actual name. Brought Warwick, the name he had registered under, and as we shall call him, to the market house, the central feature of Patesville, from both the commercial and the picturesque points of view. Standing foursquare in the heart of the town at the intersection of the 2 main streets, a jog at each street corner left around the market house a little public square, which at this hour was well occupied by carts and wagons from the country and empty drays awaiting hire. Warwick was unable to perceive much change in the market house. Perhaps the surface of the red brick, long unpainted, had scaled off a little more here and there. There might have been a slight accretion of the moss and lichen on the shingled roof, but the tall tower with its 4-faced clock rose as majestically and uncompromisingly as though the land had never been subjugated. So clearly Warwick is coming back to Patesville, where he had been growing up or something, I suppose. And nothing much has really changed, and he seems a little like blasé about that. Was it so irreconcilable, Warwick wondered, as still to peal out the curfew bell, which at 9 o'clock at night had clamorously warned all Negroes, slave or free, that it was unlawful for them to be abroad after that hour under penalty of imprisonment or whipping? Okay, so everybody black, whether they were slave or free, had to abide by a curfew, and if you didn't, you would get whipped. Can you imagine being a free person who has to abide by the city's curfew, and if you don't, you could get whipped for it? My goodness. Okay, we're clearly never going to make it through a whole chapter if I keep rambling on like this. Was the old constable, whose chief business it had been to ring the bell, still alive and exercising the functions of his office? And had age lessened or increased the number of times that obliging citizens performed this duty for him during his temporary absences in the company of convivial spirits? So he used to get drunk and couldn't ring the bell, so other people would ring the bell for him. A few minutes later, Warwick saw a colored policeman in the old constable's place, a stronger reminder that even the burned buildings that war had left its mark upon the old town with which time had dealt so tenderly. The lower story of the market house was open on all 4 of its sides to the public square. Warwick passed through one of the wide brick arches and traversed the building with a leisurely step. He looked in vain into the stalls for the butcher who had sold fresh meat twice a week on market days, and he felt a genuine thrill of pleasure when he recognized the red bandana turban of old Aunt Liddy, the ancient Negro woman who had sold him gingerbread and fried fish, and told him weird tales of witchcraft and conjuration in the old days when, as an idle boy, he had loafed about the market house. He did not speak to her, however, or give her any sign of recognition. He threw a glance toward a certain corner where steps led to the town hall above. On this stairway, he had once seen a manacled free Negro shot while being taken upstairs for examination under a criminal charge. Wow. A manacled free Negro who was shot while he was going to be examined under the criminal charge. Yeah, we're just going to shoot you now. You don't need judge and jury. Boom, shot. And while I've paused, Warwick, who is tall, dark, with straight black lustrous hair and very clean cut, high-bred features, grew up here. He knows an awful lot about what slaves and free black people were doing. And he has a whole lot of memory of this one woman who would sell him gingerbread and fried fish. What's her name? Aunt Liddy. And instead of going and speaking to her, he intentionally did not go to speak to her, lest she recognize him. So the best I can say that our friend Warwick here grew up as a black person and is now back in town passing as a white person, which explains why he's really interested in what's going on in the town. What's changed? What's new? Is the old constable still there? He's basically saying, can I fit in this town in my new way? So let's keep reading. He could see again the livid look of terror on the victim's face, the gathering crowd, the resulting confusion. The murderer, he recalled, had been tried and sentenced to imprisonment for life, but was pardoned by a merciful governor after serving a year of his sentence. I get so angry when I read things from the 19th century that just reflect everything that's happening today. Which is why it's important to read this stuff, because we can see what was happening in fiction and feel that outrage and know that, no, we can't let that happen now. It's prescient. It's a warning for us. As Warwick was neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, he could not foresee that 30 years later, even this would seem an excessive punishment for so slight a misdemeanor. Oh my gosh, killing a whole man is a slight misdemeanor, and spending a year in jail for it is having an excessive punishment. Oh my gosh, if this isn't 2020, if this isn't 2020. It was 1900, this is 2020. Leaving the market house, Warwick turned to the left and kept on his course until he reached the next corner. After another turn to the right, a dozen paces brought him in front of a small, weather-beaten frame building from which projected a wooden signboard bearing the inscription, Archibald Strait, lawyer. He turned the knob, but the door was locked. Retracing his steps past a vacant lot, the young man entered a shop where a colored man was employed in varnishing a coffin, which stood on two trestles in the middle of the floor. Not at all impressed by the melancholy suggestiveness of his task, he was whistling a lively air with great gusto. Upon Warwick's interest, this effusion came to a sudden end, and the coffin maker assumed an air of professional gravity. "Good morning, sir," he said, lifting his cap politely. "Good morning," answered Warwick. "Can you tell me anything about Judge Strait's office hours? The old judge has been a little on regular since the war, sir, but he generally gets round about 10 o'clock or so. He's been kind of feeble these last few years, and I reckon," continued the undertaker solemnly, his glance unconsciously seeking a row of fine caskets against the wall, "I reckon he'll soon be going away or all the earth. Man that is born or woman hath but a short time to live, and is full of misery. He cometh up and is cut down like as a flower. The days of his life is 70, and the old judge has lived more than that, sir, by 5 years, to say the least." So the undertaker is like, the judge is getting old. He doesn't come in as regularly as he used to. He gets in later in the day, and he's probably going to be dying soon. And I'll be right here for him, because I'm an undertaker. Now, as you heard, this is written in dialect. It's difficult to write in dialect. It's difficult to read in dialect. One of the best dialect books I've read and I love is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Read it if you get a chance. We won't be reading it here because why? It's under copyright. All right. I am going to say I'm done rambling. We are never going to get through this first chapter. These pages are bigger than some of the other books we've been reading. All right, "Death," quoted Warwick, with whose mood the undertaker's remarks were in tune, "is the penalty that all must pay for the crime of living." "That's a fact, sir, that's a fact. So they must, so they must. And then all the dead has to be buried, and we does out. We does our share of it, so we does our share. We conducts the obsequies. I'm not really sure what an obsequy is. We conduct the obsequies or all the best white folks are to town, sir. I mean, I guess it's some sort of, I've seen the word. I guess it's some sort of funeral, maybe a eulogy, something like that. You learn a lot while you read. I'll have to look that up. Warwick left the undertaker's shop and retraced his steps until he had passed the lawyer's office, toward which he threw an affectionate glance. A few rods farther led him past the old brick Presbyterian church with its square tower embowered in a stately grove, past the Catholic church with its many crosses and a painted wooden figure of St. James in a recess beneath the gable, and past the old Jefferson House, once the leading hotel of the town, in front of which political meetings had been held and political speeches made and political hard cider drunk in the days of Tippecanoe and Tyler too. The street down which Warwick had come intersected Front Street at a sharp angle in front of the old hotel, forming a sort of flatiron block at the junction known as Liberty Point, perhaps because slave auctions were sometimes held there in the good old days. That's so sad that slave auctions are held at a place called Liberty Point. The irony is extraordinary. Just before Warwick reached Liberty Point, a young woman came down Front Street from the direction of the market house. When their paths converged, Warwick kept on down Front Street behind her, it having been already his intention to walk in this direction. Well, that's curious. We'll go ahead and stop there. I'm just finding something to mark my place with. So far in the house behind the Cedars, we have Warwick, who grew up in Patesville as a black person, but now he's back as a white person. He's looking for a judge. I'm pretty sure he's a lawyer. Is he looking for a job? I'm not sure. And now he's walking behind some woman down the street because he was already going that direction. This is all very curious to me and all very interesting. So we have started House Behind the Cedars by Charles Chesnutt. I'm Rashonda Cade, and this is Reading with Rashonda.